my advice, and the only thing that helped me at that time, was to speak to another patient. Because there were lots of information out there. The nurses and the clinicians are okay at giving you information, but it is a bit of a shell shock and it's hard for you to absorb. You need time to digest it. And for me, there were options around my treatment, in the sense of, because it was a gradual decline and not a sudden decline. If it's a sudden decline, you might end up in hospital, as I found out in the latter years, which we can get to. I'll give you an example of that, where I ended up in hospital for 3 months after my kidney transplant failed. But initially, when I was diagnosed, it was a gradual decline. I'd sort of like digested what they'd said to me, but I still couldn't make my mind up around what I wanted to do. So it took me to speak to a friend of a friend of a friend that were actually on dialysis, and they told me around the different treatments and the options that I had, and that made me digest it a little bit more, because it's okay to speaking to clinicians and everyone's different. But for me, I couldn't absorb it, and it was just everything going on. It's just a bit of a whirlwind. But when you speak to someone that's actually gone through that situation, it's easier for you to absorb. So when I was given the news that I needed a transplant, it was a difficult conversation to broach, hard to fathom. You don't want to put people to suffer because of your own misery. However, it is the gift of life, and what I learned was, there's lots of people that are born there with one kidney. Also, if there is someone in your family that wants to be a donor, they've got to be 100% before they're even considered, for organ donation. But it's the best gift of life, that you can ever receive. And also, if you're getting an organ from one of your family members, in this case a kidney, it's the best match that you will ever get. For me, I got a kidney donated by my brother, started working straight away, and it's just all the little things. The first thing I notice, you'll notice with dialysis patients, you get a certain colour tinge, to your skin, and as soon as I had that transplant, my skin colour just changed, my complexion's changed. Life-wise, I went back to living a normal life. I started working full-time, and it's all the silly little things like playing with your children, going out, socialising, and it's just all the normal things. Now, I know it can be a bit of a tricky conversation in the sense where you're not asking to borrow a cup of sugar. It's obviously an organ, but it is the gift of life. And to put it firmly, I actually turned around to my brother and said, I don't want it. Deep down, I really wanted it, but I said, I don't want it. And he turned around to me and said, if it was the other way around, what would you do? And I said, I'd give you it in a heartbeat. And I think that says it all about family. So my advice to anyone on haemodialysis would be, from my own experience, it becomes a little bit frustrating where you think it might be optional, or you turn up to hospital when you want, or you only want 2 sessions instead of 3 sessions, and start cutting down your hours. But quite simply, for me, the way I look at it is haemodialysis is my new job, and that new job is to stay alive. Because if we don't go for sessions, you got to remember, when you go for haemodialysis, they are taking the blood in the machine, taking every last drop out of you, cleaning it and putting it back in. Now, without that, you can end up being very, very extremely unwell and end up in hospital for a long time. So it's important you focus, you look after yourself. It's not the end of the world. And, if you're struggling, talk to someone. There's always other patients out there just like yourselves. But my focus and the way I look at it, because I've suffered with my mental health, is I look forward and not backwards, and think fortunate in the sense where we can do something about it and look after each other. And we've got the option in this country of going to a hospital, whereas there's lots of other countries that are a lot less fortunate where, they can't have that treatment, and it is basically an option, either living or dying. Well, for me, I walked into the light, and explored different avenues, in the sense where I'm a patient advocate. I work with the Kidney Patient Association. I'm passionate about Kidney Patient Involvement Network, and the reason that became about, and everyone's different and they'll all have the different hobbies, is I was sat there in hospital and they were bringing out all these new policies, or they were doing this and they were doing that. I thought, hang on a minute, where have patients got a voice in this? This is my care. I want to get involved. So slowly, I've gone down a different path now where I'm an advocate for patient health. I do get out and about, get invited to speak, but I've also started to go back out and socialise and just find things to do in my own time, where I've just started reading again and paying focus and attention to hobbies and looking after my children. And it has given me a different purpose. So just because one path you might end up walking towards a dead end, or where there's lots of trees and there's lots of darkness, doesn't mean it's the end. All you've got to do is find another way, and just explore yourself and find something else to do. Everyone's circumstances are very, very different, and everyone's lives are very, very different. But, as patients, we're all here to help each other. And if you ever feel like that, then you need to get in touch with other patients and, have a chat. When this disease finally took hold of me, in the sense where, my kidneys failed, ended up in hospital, and I had to retire from the NHS after working there for nearly 28 years. You almost think as though your life's over and there's nothing more to do, but I almost felt as though we're thrown in the scrap heap with all this knowledge from working within the NHS, Health Education England, CQC. What do I do with all that knowledge? But fortunately for me, if you want to get involved in patient involvement, people will tell you to get involved with research, and a few years ago, before my career started, well, not a few years ago, but decades ago, I turned around and said, well, what is research? What benefit is research to me? It's just a bit of paper someone's written on. Half of people can't understand, but research is absolutely vital from a patient perspective, because what we're doing is gathering information, to make things better in the future. Now, that might not be visible straight away, but it's something that I wanted to be a part of, and I had an understanding. And for me, that guided my career towards that path. So although one path's closed, it opens up another one in and around, and it's important to me as a patient because I'm involved in my care. I want to make an influence in my care. I want to make a difference in my care, and ultimately why we're all here and why we're all talking is we want to make things better for everyone, not just patients, carers, but everyone that is involved in that renal family.